skirt on this time. Awesome.
Oh, they did. Oh, fantastic.
Oh, nice. Yeah.
Now you can, wiggle your toes the whole time.
In a skirt, I'm happy about this.
Marielle and Luis, I'm sorry we had to see your feet the whole time. It's probably difficult. So now we have the skirt, so we're set. We're set now. It's a good liturgical color too, so it really brings out the Catholicness of it all. All right, thank you everybody for hanging around for the second half here of our conversation today. And like I said before, this is, we're a smallish group, so I really want this to be a conversation. We're going to talk about education, talk about higher education and Catholic tech ethics there, but feel free to, in the questions and discussion, bring in some of the themes from the first half. And then sort of I'll come back up near the end and sort of talk about next steps a little bit and where we go from there. So we have three speakers here, one who you might recognize from the first half of the conversation here. But Matt Gaudet is also speaking here, and he is the Director of Ethics Programs and Initiatives at the School of Engineering, University of Santa Clara, and a Fellow of the Grefenstette Center. His research lies at the intersection of moral theology and political and social theory, with a particular interest in the topics of tech ethics, disability ethics, ethics of war and peace, and university ethics. He recently co-edited a Journal of Moral Theology special issue on artificial intelligence, which is actually featuring a number of the scholars here today. And then after Matt goes, we'll have Dr. Schertz, and then we'll go on to Dr. Florence Chi, who is an associate professor in the School of Communication and program director of the Center for Digital Ethics and Policy at Loyola University, Chicago. She's also the founding director of the Social and Interactive Media Lab, Chicago, devoted to the in-depth study of social phenomena at the intersection of society and technology. Since 2020, she has served as an external consultee to the Freedom Online Coalition's Task Force on AI and Human Rights, and is a key consultant of the United Nations 3C Roundtable on Artificial Intelligence. So please join me in welcoming our panelists for this afternoon. And Dr. Gaudet will begin with you.
All right. Thank you. So the Princeton philosopher Michael Walzer, in his famous book, Just and Unjust Wars, starts off by saying that he wants to write not to the philosophers, but to the ordinary citizens and soldiers, because that's essentially how we're going to actually change the world. And so I'm going to take a little bit of a shift away from the theology that still has my head spinning, Luis, and I'm still trying to wrap my head around everything that happened this morning, and I'm going to try to move us to a practical, very practical level. I teach in an engineering school. I'm trained as a theological ethicist. I was a mechanical engineer as an undergrad, though, and I kind of bring those two together, and I teach in an engineering school. And so I take a little bit of a different approach to how to do this. And what I'm going to try to present today is what we're trying to do in order to train an engineer, what the formation of an engineer, of a technologist themselves, might look like, or at least what we're trying to do at Santa Clara. And so with that said, it's something of a truism that many engineering students, at least at Santa Clara, come to the field of engineering out of a compulsion to do good or serve humanity. While it's true that engineering offers solid job prospects and above average salaries, in my experience, most engineering students are drawn to the field by a moral desire as much as a financial one. Unfortunately, studies show that, as a set, engineering schools are not very good at cultivating this impetus. A 2014 study of students in American engineering schools has shown that engineering curricula, in particular, are failing to inculcate a, quote, professional commitment to the public welfare in their students, or what Jesuits might call living a life for others. In fact, students' experiences of the, quote again, in fact, quote, students' experience over the course of their undergraduate programs decreases their interest in public welfare considerations of engineering, unquote. In short, in our efforts to train students in technical excellence, we are diminishing the spark within students that compels them towards moral excellence. Several factors contribute to this diminishment, but research points to the effects of a culture of disengagement from moral concerns in engineering education. Quote, disengagement entails bracketing a variety of concerns not considered directly relevant to the design or implementation of technological objects and systems, such as socioeconomic inequality, history, and global politics, unquote. Engineering professors do not purposefully bracket ethical concerns or historical concerns or sociological concerns, but when most technical requirements are raised up as what engineers do, and ethics is pushed to the core requirements bucket that's taught from some other school in some other department across the campus, then it sends a signal. Moreover, when professors that students meet with regularly and extensively are all in their home department, but engagement with the ethics professor from another college is a one and done experience, it sends a signal. And so when the department faculty are the ones guiding senior design projects, these capstone projects, and again, the ethical aspects of design are tangential at best, it sends a signal. So to do better, we at Santa Clara University just recognized we needed to shift not only our own curriculum, but actually our whole culture. Now, to be fair, when this effort began 4 years ago, Santa Clara did have one full-time faculty member dedicated to teaching ethics, which in itself is far better than most schools which is far better than most schools, who either do not include an ethics requirement at all, or outsource it to the humanities or the College of Arts and Sciences. The one full-time faculty member, me, taught 7 25-person sections of a single course, Ethics and Technology, each year. The class filled almost every time, but with about 80% of the students being engineers. So of the 175 seats offered in Engineering 19 every year, about 150 were engineering students. This was about half of the 300 students we had at the time. We're now up to about 400 students per year at the time. We're now up to about 400. So we'd be at even less than half if this was where we stayed. The other 50% of the engineering students took one of about 40 courses offered in about 10 different departments across the campus. Some of these courses had tangential import for the future of the engineering student, things like environmental ethics or business ethics, but many had little to no connection to their future as engineers. It sends a signal when we separate ethics from the technological curriculum. So, all right, but even with 50% of students taking an engineering-specific course for their ethics requirement, we still found that when asked to do ethical analysis of their senior design projects, very few students were capable of recalling even the most basic knowledge from their ethics course. Moreover, the general sentiment towards the ethics requirements of the senior design process was that they were an afterthought or a procedural hurdle. And no wonder. Our structures and our approach to ethics had taught them that moral reasoning was just that. It was relegated to a single course drawn for scores of courses that may or may not have anything to do with their major or future employment. They were a procedural hurdle. And they could be taken from any time in their 4 years. There was no place in the curriculum where it fit. It was an afterthought in their education. And thus, we plotted a better way to do ethics. Our efforts had 3 overlapping foci. First, we wanted ethics to move from the periphery to the center of what it means to do engineering and to be an engineer. Specifically, we aimed for ethics to be present in the engineering curriculum across all 4 years, ethics across the curriculum, and integrated within the technical curriculum. Second, we wanted to shift the mindset of our students from engineering as a code of principles or laws principle of codes or laws to follow, to instead engage them as a form of character formation. That is, we moved away from following and instead engaging them. We moved away from the concept of doing engineering and toward the concept of becoming and eventually being an engineer. Our hope in shifting to focus on the identity of being a good engineer our hope was that in shifting the focus to being a good engineer would carry forward with them into the working world in a more robust way than the previous method had. Third, we sought to move the School of Engineering faculty from a pedagogy of knowledge transfer, the whole of the School of Engineering faculty, including the technical faculty, right? From a pedagogy of knowledge transfer, the teaching of skills and methods, to more of an apprenticeship pedagogy focused on the formation, and here again, the moral and the technical formation of the engineer. So we're putting the burden on the technical faculty too. You're not just here to teach the load of a camshaft, right? You're here to teach how to become an engineer and to demonstrate that. So In an effort to get ethics across the engineering curriculum, we made 3 immediate changes. First thing we did was to reconstitute the ethics component of Engineering 1, our intro course. It had been a half-hour session on ethics, just sort of opening up some of the ethical topics at the cutting edge of technology. This was interesting to students, but left the impression that if you were not working in one of these cutting-edge fields, ethics was not a concern. So instead, what I did was I took over an entire hour of the course. The course was only 10 weeks long and 1 hour a week, so I took over 1/10 of the course. And I focused on the concept of the engineer as a professional, in the traditional sense of the word, as a member of a profession. In early universities, the professions were distinguished from the crafts in that the knowledge of the profession was highly specific and not widely understood, and thus, the quality of the craft could only be determined by another professional. For example, I may not have the skills of a fine carpenter, but I can generally tell the good workmanship from IKEA crap. This is not true of the professions. I can't tell if my medical doctor is doing a good job diagnosing my symptoms. The best I can do is go get a second opinion from another professional, right? In addition, within the profession, there is a necessary social trust we must place on the professions that we don't need to place on the crafts. This trust requires moral responsibility. Today, engineering is aptly listed amongst the professions. I can't tell if the software engineer who programmed my phone protected my privacy, or if the civil engineer who built my house designed it to withstand an earthquake. I live in California. I must rely on the trust of the engineers who designed the product in my life. Framing the engineering disciplines in this way, the technologists in this way, from the outset of the student's educational formation, teaches them to see how ethics must be integrated in what they do and who they want to become. The second thing we did was we added a second course, a new course aimed at sophomores and qualifying for one of their religion, theology, and culture courses. This course, Values in Technology, explores the relationships individual users, society as a whole, and engineers and designers have with the technology that they design, build, and use. It teaches students to see technology as value-laden, and thus design decisions as requiring moral discernment. It teaches students to look beyond the specific utility of the object being designed and to consider the negative externalities the product might produce. And it looks to wisdom from sources such as Amish theology, African Ubuntu theology, but yes, also Pope Francis's Laudato Si and Fratelli Tutti, to begin to name for themselves, hopefully helping the engineers to name for themselves, the values that should inform our and their design process, right? The course was also meant to be a precursor for the aforementioned Ethics and Technology, which is more of a methods course and aimed at juniors. In this way, by building up the freshman year presentation, adding a sophomore course, keeping the main course in junior year, and then really trying to connect to senior design, we've now encompassed all 4 years. And we keep ethics at the forefront of their thought through all 4 years. So the third thing we did was we began to reconsider the ethics component of senior design. The status quo expectation was that the design teams needed to include a section on the ethics of their project. But the guidance of the project was very open-ended, and since it was only read by the project advisor, who was an engineering professor, for many of the projects, it was relegated to be an undeveloped afterthought. So we began with adding a refresher lecture by myself at the outset of the design process to remind those students who took Engineering 16 and 19 what they had learned and how it might aptly apply to their project. Second, we have been working to get the faculty advisors more engaged with the ethical ramifications of their design projects that they're revising. This is only the beginning of our efforts to rethink ethics in senior design, but it's what we have done so far. Lastly, one of the things we realized early on in the process was that these issues could not be solved by ethics faculty alone. It can't just be me and now we've hired another and we're adding more ethics faculty along the way. But senior design was an excellent example of this. We recognized that adding an ethics advisor to every student design group was simply impractical. But without consistent guidance to consider ethics as part of the design process, students would quickly let these considerations take a back seat. We are attacking this problem from 2 sides. First, we are hopeful that ethics becomes a greater part of how engineering is done in the lower levels that will trickle up into how engineering gets done in the senior design and then beyond. In this way, the quality of ethical analysis in our senior design projects will be the litmus test for the success of the entire program from senior, and we will continue to monitor as such. But the other thing we had to do was we had to push a kind of cultural shift. And we began this with a faculty seminar that we offered last summer, and we hope to repeat in future years. The first iteration of this seminar included 12 full-time faculty members, including multiple department chairs and the associate dean. The dean of engineering and the VP of mission also participated in one of the 2 days of the seminar. In this seminar, we invited faculty to abandon this traditional concept of ethics as the pouring of knowledge from a source, the professor, into a vessel that begins empty but fills up, i.e. the student. In its place, we offered a metaphor of walking with the student along a journey of formation. This notion of walking with is a very Jesuit concept, right? And Santa Clara being a Jesuit school. The notion, in Jesuit terms, is known as accompanied discernment. It's an adaptation of the facilitator retreatant model of the spiritual exercises of St. Ignatius, and thus draws upon and promotes the mission and charisms of the Jesuit university itself. In this model, the student takes more ownership of and does more reflection on their own formation. Rather than being handed a set of assignments to complete a course or a set of courses to complete for a degree, the students are invited to reflect on the questions, who do I want to be in this world, and how can my engineering skills contribute to the world I want to see? During the seminar, faculty participants were also given training in moral formation and ethical discernment in the Ignatian tradition that will help them in their role as mentor for this walking with process. Following the seminar, latitude was given to the faculty to determine how they integrate this into their own pedagogy, and creativity was encouraged. The shift in understanding the task of the professor can manifest in many ways. Some might replace a traditional lecture or test with a more active and reflective assignment that invites direct student participation and design of the assignment itself. Others might reconstitute how they approach the senior design advising. But coming out of the seminar, faculty participants were incentivized to redesign at least one assignment or one module of one of their courses to be more oriented toward this accompanied discernment model of formation. This seminar is merely the first of what we hope to be a series of efforts that were helping to rethink faculty relationships with their students with the knowledge that they are tasked to teach. And so this is all the first steps, our first round of efforts to move the curriculum toward a greater integration of ethics and design. And it's a good first step. Fortunately, my dean has made it one of her goals to examine the curriculum and to reimagine how the curriculum should look in the next 5 to 10 years. And so we're actually doing a full curriculum sort of assessment. And in this, we're adding now 2 more courses. And we're actually gonna have a 4-course sequence that's gonna incorporate another set of what would be considered core requirements. They're cultures and ideas set. And so we're gonna end up with a 4-course sequence that incorporates social science, ethics, theology, all under this sort of heading of how do I operate, or what sort of engineer do I want to be in the world? The final aspect that we plan to integrate in the first-year experience is to assign specific first-year advisors plus, is what we're calling them, who are trained to walk with students, specifically trained to walk with students and help them to discern their own path, including the traditional selection of a major and selection of classes, but to also help students form their own concept of the moral character and the professional identity they want to embody. These advisors will remain in this mentoring role through the 4 years, even after the students choose a major and turn over academic advising duties to another faculty member. At the other end of the path, the School of Engineering is also reimagining the senior design process. Currently, every department and major has its own courses, methods, and standards for doing senior design. The only common element is the final due dates. In an effort to standardize the process and allow for more interdisciplinary projects, we're moving to a more unified sort of framework. But this also allows us to now integrate ethics more readily into it because all of the majors are doing the same process, right? And so as a common set of wickets and expectations for all projects. The shift will allow us to better design a more standardized ethical requirement, I just said that, but also to provide the guidance necessary for both students through targeted guest lectures along the way. The effort to train faculty in moral formation and ethical discernment in the Ignatian tradition will also help to give the tools they need to walk with their design teams. So we're really trying to embrace the mission of a Jesuit university, swap out Jesuit for Catholic there, and I think it would work just as well. But really trying to embrace the mission of a Jesuit university, but how to make engineering curriculum in particular. Now, I'm in a unique position in that I am a Catholic ethicist, Catholic theological ethicist operating within the engineering curriculum. Not everybody has that opportunity. But I do think there's ways in which we can rethink our curriculum itself to stop treating core classes as these one and done experiences and instead really try to integrate throughout whatever curriculum, whether it's a medical curriculum or an engineering curriculum or whatever, I know here at Duquesne, medicine, all the different, there's like multiple schools dealing with medicine, right? And so, how do we rethink our professional disciplines? And how do we rethink our future occupations? And in particular, our orientation to the technology that we are creating and designing. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, and thank you all again for being here and for that talk. That was great, and for your response. The Vatican II document, Gravissimum Educationis, as well as the more recent Ex Corde Ecclesiae, frames their argument for the need for increased reflection on Catholic education, in part because of the developments in technology and science. Technology and science are in the preface of these documents. The impetus from technologies for renewed attention to education is even more pressing today. So digital technologies, as we all know, are shaping our social institutions and individual lives for good and ill to unprecedented degrees. Amazing tools for research, powerful ways of maintaining relationships, or even as vehicles to foster spiritual growth, as with podcasts helping many people read the Bible in a year. Yet, as Gaudium et Spes and more recent magisterial reflection has argued, new technologies are also raising the challenges like undermining traditions and encouraging a narrow empiricism. They're inspiring hate and political division by allowing people to dwell increasingly in narrow echo chambers, fostering lust and the objectification of others who we interact with merely by swiping right, or driving the abandonment of the will to various addictions like online gambling. Technologies offer the key to some of our most pressing problems like climate change or cancer, but they can also be used to brutally extract profits from workers. For these reasons, it's even more important today than 50 years ago for Catholic institutions to educate students in the good use and development of technology. As Matt stated, and there's going to be a lot of agreement between our talks today, this education requires more than just, first, a good technology course, right? As it demands that students be able to, quote, appraise moral values with a right conscience and to embrace them with a personal adherence. It even requires more than merely running a course on technology ethics. Catholic education seeks not merely to impart isolated bits of knowledge or specific cognitive skills, rather it aims to shape character. As Gravissimum Educationum states, it aims to help those involved, quote, develop harmoniously their physical, moral, and intellectual endowments so that they may gradually acquire a mature sense of responsibility. Helping students develop the responsibility and character necessary to properly deal with emerging technology involves forming them in a proper worldview and its associated virtues. Right. As Mariel discussed, Pope Francis emphasizes that many dangers of technology are fostered by what he calls the technocratic paradigm, seeing the world and technology as being of use merely to manipulate others in an instrumental fashion for our own selfish ends. To confront our problems, Francis says that we need an educational program that, quote, generates resistance to the assault of the technocratic paradigm. Such an education would open us to encountering Christ in others, as well as seeing good and beauty in nature and other people. Catholic universities, with their rich tradition of liberal arts, can form this broader worldview. Yet this educational program, and here Pope Francis frames the issue in terms of ecological education, must include more than just information, but also it must instill good habits, since, quote, the existence of laws and regulations is insufficient in the long run to curb bad conduct. If the laws are to bring significant, long-lasting effects, the majority of the members of society must be adequately motivated to accept them and personally transformed to respond. As Shannon Valor has also argued, using and designing technology well will require forming virtues in regard to technology. It will also require recognizing how certain uses of technology degrade virtues. Catholic education is well positioned to form these virtues of technology, as it has always sought to foster the virtues that help students seek the interrelated goals of individual flourishing and the common good, and hopefully will help them on their path to eternal beatitude. While all education forms character, Catholic education seeks to make this character formation explicit. From this description of the relationship of Catholic education to technology, it should be clear that a single technology ethics course, or even a technology ethics minor, won't be sufficient to fulfill the ends of Catholic education. Discussing specific ethical questions in a classroom is just not how virtues and worldview take shape. A proper worldview will be shaped not just in technology ethics courses, but primarily in more basic philosophical and theological courses that emphasize human dignity and lay out a teleological vision of care for creation. It will be shaped by social science courses that provide a concrete picture of justice and injustice. And it will be firmly founded in arts and literature in classes as well as the design of campus, since these mold the passions and instill a love for beauty and responsiveness to the good. As Francis notes, adopting a proper worldview requires an aesthetic education. Quote, by learning to see and appreciate beauty, we learn to reject self-interested pragmatism. Through aesthetics, students can be encouraged to have these virtuous passions. Virtues are also formed in the context of daily practice. So to take a similar example to technology design, as Matt used, all research is a kind of craft whose virtues are formed through the practice of the craft. So this is, as Michael Polanyi discusses in relationship to scientific research, and Alistair McIntyre discusses more generally, the mentors in a craft, so a research mentor, a scientific advisor, serves as an exemplar of good research practice. And the student develops the same characteristics through the day-by-day imitation of their mentors that makes up learning a craft. So if we want unbiased algorithms, it is necessary to have faculty who themselves are committed to truth, accuracy, and justice, and who make their labs and classrooms environments in which these goods are valued. If we want safe technologies, then we need faculty who care about risk. Forming students with virtue in technology design therefore requires careful attention to the environment in which research and technology takes place and the selection of faculty committed to ethical technology. It requires ensuring that the university's institutional structures do not undermine these virtues, though, through, for example, a too great focus on competitiveness and profitability at the expense of truth and justice. That's the problem with a lot of the grant-making culture and the culture of seeking public-private partnerships. Similarly, a student's virtue in using technologies will be shaped by the campus culture, how social media is used by peers, what types of websites are available on the campus network, and how technologies are used in classes. For example, in one of my technology ethics courses, one of the assignments I give students is to fast from technology, right? So just to take 2 days off, right? And just help them to see what role technology is playing in their life and how they're relating to it. And what was interesting was a lot of them said that one of the most difficult problems they had with just taking 2 days of not using social media or the internet was that courses that required intensive interaction with course management software like Blackboard or Canvas, right? So professors were updating things at the last minute or requiring these kind of continual assignments being turned in every couple of days. And I feel that this is really forming them poorly to have healthy relationships with their work software in the future and taking the weekend off from email. Thus, it's a total training provided by the university that will teach students to engage technology well. At the same time, dedicated courses in technology ethics have a critical role to play in forming virtues and worldview. Such classes can thematize the connections among worldview, virtues, and technological practice that underlie the rest of the curriculum. Classes in technology ethics help students to make their values in relation to technology explicit and realize that, as Pope Francis continually reminds us, everything is connected. Aristotelian philosophy and art classes have a lot to say about AI and algorithms. The classes can bring to life how a virtuous person will engage with technology, thereby allowing a positive vision of how to use technology well. It will also help students bring up problems of technology in their other, more directly professional coursework. It, of course, would be best for all professors to bring up questions surrounding technology ethics that arise in their topics area, right? So some kind of curriculum or fellows program that engages the broader faculty, like you're doing at Santa Clara, or like the one the Grefenstette Center is running, is a nice way to do this. Moreover, even someone who values and embodies virtue will face difficult trade-offs and tragic dilemmas in their real-world experiences that require practical wisdom to be honed. So example from medical ethics, there's cases of triage of ventilators in the early days of the COVID pandemic, which was just not an easy topic to solve, and just having virtue is not necessarily going to be enough to solve these things. Tech ethics, there's the questions of nuclear power, the risk of nuclear power plants versus the risks of global warming, right? So there's these kinds of things that require training in how to do complex technical, ethical analysis that you can learn in a technology ethics course. Right, so technology ethics courses should give students the practical intellectual tools and, to use an unpopular word, casuistical skills to navigate such situations well, as moral theologians have done for countless other fields like medicine, law, and warfare. These classes also bring to light structural injustices that may be opaque to even the most virtuous individual who is embedded in technological systems, things like bias. In bringing these to light, students begin to imagine alternatives and solutions and see how their own practice contributes to these. For all of these reasons, a good technology ethics class plays a central role in forming students to ethically navigate the contemporary world. Such classes have to be good, though, not overly individualistic or utilitarian, or else they might undermine formation in virtue, right? So there's a good history, some critical histories of medical ethics, for example, talk about how the early medical ethics courses in the 1980s were too individualistic, focusing almost entirely on autonomy, right? And this shaped the hospital system to be entirely focused on informed consent, losing a focus on justice and care, and these other values that have to go into medicine. So we need a complex technology ethics curriculum, one that's personalist, relational, and justice-oriented, that will protect human dignity and flourishing. So Catholic educational institutions need a broad commitment to technology ethics. As Francis notes in a recent talk to researchers, Catholic education must form, quote, the head, hands, and heart together, preserving and enhancing the link between learning, doing, and feeling in the noblest sense. Catholic universities have to have a research culture that virtuously forms the makers of technology and a campus culture that forms the future users of technology. This formation should be undergirded by a broad curriculum that shapes a truly Catholic worldview. The keystone of this formation in the virtue of technology is a well-designed technology ethics curriculum that will make these values explicit, help students apply them in complex situations, and reveals obscured issues in the structures of technology. If a Catholic university can implement such a program, then it can serve another function of virtue ethics. As noted earlier, virtue ethics acts through exemplars, ideals and personal examples that inspire others to live well and show them how to do it. Ideally, a Catholic university should provide the world with such exemplars and itself serve as one. Properly formed students can serve as examples to those around them. The research produced by Catholic universities can exemplify how technology can serve the common good. And as an institution, the university can show the world how to better train students in the use of technology. In these ways, Catholic education can serve in its ultimate goal as a tool of evangelization, encouraging the world to adapt our ever-expanding capabilities to serve the ends of human flourishing, the common good, and ultimately the gospel.
Thank you for these wonderful presentations that talk about how we definitely need more than one course in the curriculum. I myself have a background in computing science, and the way we regarded the ethics compulsory course was very unfavorably and just something to hold your nose and take. And now finding myself in a school of communication, it's a little better. But we're trying to, just last week, I was heading up an initiative to decouple our 300 level digital media ethics course from our 200 level ethics and communication course. And this was because if you took the 200 level course, you could not take the 300 level course. They were regarded as equivalent. And so having to make the case to take more than one ethics course is still very much a concern. And we really do need to be at the forefront, as your presentations clearly show that you are. And so thank you for this gift of your innovative pedagogies that you're providing. And they really are innovative and not too quick about it, because we're still reckoning with the institutional barriers, disciplinary silos, turf wars that pervade the institution in the effort to carry out these missions. As St. Ignatius of Loyola said famously, "Go forth and set the world on fire." I also like to trot out the William Butler Yeats quote of education is not the filling of a pail, but the lighting of a fire. And they serve similar purposes for how we need to approach ethics education, especially in the STEM fields where, for example, the concern, having just served on a task force to bring together computer science and communication in the curriculum, they are concerned, they being computer scientists and engineers primarily, that the humanities and social science students need to learn how to code. They need to learn the technical aspects. And so the clapback for that is, well, are they required to learn Gender 101? Are they required to learn about race, technology, carcerality, surveillance issues that can arise? And generally the answer is a very limited no. So my question or set of questions to the panelists here, how do we hold practitioner faculty's feet to the fire? And Matt did provide some practical solutions which they have already pursued at Santa Clara. But incentivizing is one part. How do you assess, or are there initiatives in motion or in place to assess whether or not those outcomes have indeed been achieved? Right? And so, do you have a Center for Engaged Learning, for example, that helps oversee or audit this process? These are just some questions to consider. Another one is there accountability? Because, are we even there yet? I like what I'm hearing about the ethical layer being applied to these courses too, and if they're not explicitly about ethics, that there is an ethical layer and component. And it is indeed a challenge to get these items on the table. And just another set of anecdotes I've often asked, how do we code for silence? Because these are empirical fields that we're often engaged with. And it's kind of like pictures or it didn't happen. And if we're seeing it and sensing it, then it's on the record. So this gives rise to an increasing police state, surveillance state. But what about the in-between, right? What about the silences? So being an ethnographer, if I sit with someone, one-on-one, they don't need to say anything necessarily for me to have communicated with them, right? For communication to have happened. However, in terms of the record or the AI that might be transcribing what we're saying at that point, the record is null. So how do we account for these meaningful shortcomings and the way we ascribe meaning to the digital record, for example? I've been laughed at by rooms of computer scientists who have collected data, and I said, well, what if we don't collect that data? And they said, oh no, you have to be kidding. We absolutely need to collect these petabytes of data on every mouse click, every eye twitch, right? So in this kind of gluttony of signal and noise. How are we to discern these things? We would do well to have these practitioners understand the environmental costs of Bitcoin, for example, right? And not just pursue the shiny. And what exactly are the total costs of engagement and chasing these fashionable technological tools. It is not always the case where we need to pursue this direction, and having that mission in my work, especially, I've felt really bolstered and supported in this, teaching students how to be judicial about what technologies they're using, as Paul encourages his digital fast. And that is something that we're trying to do across the board. Institutionally, I want to also ask, what would you recommend institutions who are just now mobilizing on these efforts? What would you say to them as things that you've learned and what you would caution? And I'll leave it at there. Thank you.
Lots to chew on
Yeah.
there. I'm still thinking about that last question about the silences and how do we make room for the silences? How do we acknowledge the silences? How do we almost the best question is how do we value the silences? I'm going back to the first conversation. John at the beginning said, let's bring in both conversations into conversation, bring both presentations into conversation. I was like, I'm not sure that's going to work, but maybe it does. Because I do think there is something to be said here for the technocratic paradigm as technology for technology's sake, and this notion of, do we always have to have technology? Do we always have to have the counting? Do we always have to have the, right? And is there something to recognizing, who was it that described the God of the gaps? I don't remember now. But this idea of like God being in that liminal space, that space in between, and the presence of that, and almost reflective of Luis's sort of sense of wonder, right? That we should take wonder in not just this shiny thing, to use your words, Florence, but also in the lack of that shiny thing. How much do we wonder about the absence of our technology? I love your assignment. I always do a technology inventory where they write down every piece of technology they've used since they woke up that morning, and that can take the list becomes infinite. To actually fast from that is taking it to another level. But yeah, there's just sort of awareness. The first step is just awareness. What role does technology play in our lives? And that's where, once we begin to become aware of the presence of technology in our lives, but then also the effects of technology in our lives, and then the next step I always take it to is the effects of technology on our society. That society is written by the technologies we use and vice versa, right? We have the fact that we are having this conference right now, right, involved several of us flying here or driving here, or, right, technology had to get us here. We couldn't have this kind of conversation without it. And so the intellectual community is built around the fact that we have technologies that can do that sort of thing. And so society itself is always in response to technology. But now I'm just sort of going off, stream of consciousness. I'm going to turn it over to Paul.
Well, thank you for that response, and thanks especially. I mean, what was really striking to me was your sharing of all those stories of the difficulties of getting the importance of ethics through to computer scientists and colleagues and people who are designing things. And I think this is one of the, you've found allies and you have people in the administration that are working really well to kind of design your program. But this is one of the difficulties with having a programmatic or bureaucratic solution to like ethical formation. I mean, it really takes a disposition and finding the faculty member in the kind of fields who share that disposition and also see these problems, or at a kind of, just at a brief nudging that will bring it forward. I mean, my earlier work was on biological research and the difficulties that were occurring there with everyone trying to become entrepreneurs and this, making shortcuts and therefore, having reproducibility crisis and various kinds of making negative technologies just because they can commercialize it. And really, I mean, to get out of that, you need to find the people who haven't been shaped in a problematic formation, or at least find a deep way to kind of shift their formation. So, I mean, at CUA, I've been lucky with trying to figure out these things because we have a lot of faculty there in these departments who are really interested in having science ethics and are really curious about learning these things better. We have people in bioengineering, who's really excited about the Society of Catholic Scientists because it will help him try to make these connections and things like that. So that's one of the ways that I've seen it occur, is you find the people who already see silence as important, or could see science as important, and then make those connections and make those alliances, and then you have to move from there.
I do the digital inventory as well, and the fantastic thing about that is, what do they do first thing in the morning, and where do they get their news? Something journalistic is, I look at my feed for whatever social media app they're using, and that's how they're getting the news. Yep. This has profound ramifications for the quality of that news, and gives rise to a whole discussion on algorithmic bias and disinformation, misinformation. And so it is a really fruitful starting point.
I remember when I was in grad school, I was challenged by, not I, all of us, the entire sort of cohort of grad students at the time was challenged by a professor to ask, how are you a public theologian, right? How are you engaging with the public? And one of the questions was, where are you getting your news from? And there was this generational divide between the professors, our mentors, who got their news from traditional sources, newspapers and whatnot, and those of us who said, oh no, we get it from Facebook and social media, and like, yes, we're still getting it from the news outlets through that, but it is, and at the time, that seemed like a off-the-cuff answer. Well, yeah, I pretty much just go to my news feed. Nowadays, we recognize the values that are inherent in the algorithmic bias and the how we're giving over our values to some algorithm and letting that decide what's important to us and what's not important to us. And that's such an important part of this sort of just general awareness. It is interesting teaching in an engineering school to both those who are designing technology, but then also those who are using technology, and sort of putting in tension those two aspects of how we relate to technology. And to think very clearly about how are we using technology, and then how should we design technology to be used better, right? The one sort of comes before the other.
Thank you. So, Matt, you talked about ethics across or embedded throughout the curriculum, and you asked, maybe for suggestions for organizations or universities that are more at the beginning of this process. So I wanted to make a pitch for ethics outside the curriculum, but still on campus, while you're trying to move all the difficult to move parts. For example, I also work at Santa Clara. We engage with student groups, with engineering groups, and we have evening sessions. And what we do is we just invite students over for pizza and for a case study analysis. And we pick something that's really interesting, like IoT toys that they might want to talk about. And we have them work through a case study with a framework and work in groups with other students. And what that means is it's not in a class, it's not graded, there isn't a professor that you have to try to please in some way or worry about. And it's one way that any university can start doing this stuff while they're building the courses, while they're developing all the other things we've been talking about.
Fantastic.
You know, I'm not sure I realized how distinctly my work on university ethics dovetails with my work on technology ethics until this very conversation. In many ways, in my mind, there were two very separate things I did. But it's only in sort of acknowledging my own sort of role in developing students, and then the institutional and systematic and structural hurdles we have to get over, the grant competitions and the, and all of the, and then just the people, right? Beginning to recognize the integration of how university ethics is informed by this. And we are lucky in the School of Engineering to have one of the largest, if not the largest, it depends on how you measure it, ethics center in the country, applied ethics center in the country right on campus. I mean, I think I counted at one point, and we have something. Once you start adding up the ethicists in the business school and the theology school and the theology department and the philosophy department and engineering, and then all the ethicists at the Markula Center, we have something like 25 ethicists on campus. Like, I don't know if most campuses have that kind of, campuses of our size have that sort of, at least teacher or ethicist to student ratio, we'll say. And it presents so many different ways in which we can engage, both curricularly and also extracurricularly. And we do have a great working relationship where I've sent ARENA students to work on Internet of Things. I'm actually thinking about one particular student who was a student of mine and wanted to do more after my class. And I said, well, why don't you go over to Markula? And they did a fellowship over there, and they developed programs like Arena's talking about, and then engage more students who then say, I want to do more, and they send them back to my class. And it's just this nice symbiotic relationship where we're really trying to work together. And so it is something of you got to start somewhere at the spark and then build and find the people and build the people and create a culture. And it is what Jim Keenan calls creating a culture of ethics at the university that's so necessary. It's not just creating ethical structures or artifacts or, right, but instead actually creating a whole culture around it. So.
Yeah, I'm not sure where I'm going to go with this, but no, first thing is to say, I think what was great is, and you probably don't notice, all three of you come with a strong scientific discipline, which means when you come to teach ethics, you have a credibility. Second thing, but more importantly, it's because the ethics is actually intrinsic. It's not something, so you're bringing somebody from outside, you bring somebody in, it's sending a message that somehow this is an add-on or it can be delegated. And that, I think, is, for me, a key thing is that ethics is intrinsic. Where am I going with this? Here's my thing. Some years ago, I was teaching in Dublin, a small Catholic catechetical college that was absorbed into a big business and technical university, Dublin City University. And I was asked to teach business ethics by the president of the university. The dean of the faculty did not want me there. And I show up, obviously dressed like this. Even if I wasn't dressed like this, all knew I was a priest. The first key signal I say was that ethics is not intrinsic. It's somehow you bring the priest in to do the ethics. And I just have a slight hesitancy here about talking about Catholic all the time, the Catholic university. I think the ethical, we have to frame it not simply as a Catholic thing. I think there's a danger, because many people out there, there's an Irish writer I like quoting, who had this quote about, the Catholic Bible in the beginning was the Word, and the Word was no. And there is, whether we like it or not, there is that perception that somehow it's a naysaying. But back to my own experience, which was the dean who didn't want me there said to me, now, you can't mention religion. Don't be mentioning religion. Fairly secular environment. And that was fair enough. But in fact, at the end of the day, as we did business cases, because I had to suddenly work up a knowledge of business ethics, and business cases were great and case studies, it always came back to, why would you do the right thing when it's at a cost to you personally? Why would you be ethical when you won't have the support of the company you work in, when you won't have the society standing up to applaud you, when you'd be marginalized, when you'd be seen as a crime, when you suffer at the level. So it's how do we open that deeper question about the point and purpose of life, which I think is not simply a religious issue. It's about a meaning, it's an anthropological question. And can we legitimately open that up, or how can we go there? Just
I completely agree, and the only reason I was saying Catholic so much was because I was asked to comment on the pedagogy and promise of tech ethics in Catholic higher education. But, yeah.
The biggest
But,
story.
but that's why I speak about virtue, flourishing, common good, right? These are kind of, I think, can be made universal, and they speak to these questions of purpose and what is your motivation? How do you form one's passions and inclinations and disposition? And so I completely agree with you on that front. That's not just Catholic, it's broader, what we can bring to the world.
Yeah, I mean, I agree. The one word I would add to the list used is identity. And I really try and focus on this identity as an engineer and what does it mean to be an engineer. And it starts with that first lecture on professionalism and what it means to be a professional. But then I do layer it. It is a Catholic school and it is a Jesuit school that has certain charisms that we can use and utilize. And I just look to those as sources of wisdom, not necessarily as dogmatic, truths that they have to buy into because they are a believer, but instead sources of wisdom that they can find their own wisdom in, as they're trying to discover for themselves. One of the first things I say to every class I ever teach is one of the reasons I love teaching the university level is you're teaching an undergraduate level is that you're teaching students who are discovering themselves for the first time, right? There was a study I read many years ago that said there's 2 times in a person's life where they go seeking religious conversion and philosophy books and self-help books and this sort of self-discovery of self. And it's when you leave the home for the first time, exactly where our undergraduates are, and it's when you have a baby for the first time, right? And so basically it's when you're responsible for yourself and when you're responsible for someone else. All of a sudden we have to figure out who we want to be in this world. And what I tell the students is, when you have that baby, you're not going to have time to spend 10 weeks reflecting on who you want to be in this world. So take this course as an opportunity to do that, because that's the way I've designed the course, and to give it to you in that way. So, and I have designed the course very much as a self-reflection on who do you want to be in this world? What type of engineer do you want to be in this world? What type of person do you want to be in this world? Just almost short-circuit that question of why should we ever do anything that's outside of our self-interest? Instead, I flip it on them, and it comes back to that study that I was noting at the very beginning of my talk was that engineers start with this impetus to do good. And so I embrace that and run with it, and don't let them lose that throughout the program instead. And really try and encourage that and bring it out rather than shove it down with this, you must know this technical knowledge and we must do this all sort of technically.
I also figure it's good to think like a research scientist, and the triangulation of data is really a common concept that if you can apply the moral principles and it groks with the scientific principles and it also comports with your own sense of direction, then you're probably good. Right? It's just the triangulation of the 3 factors is a good kind of compass.
Lots of data points? Is that
Data
we're
points.
going back to
More
that?
data, if there are data people.
You got a question in the back, John?
All right, so I'm a freshman here, and in my class, I'm just brought to think of one girl in our English class, and her only thought, because she's in the pre-med track, is why do I have to be here? This isn't directly relevant to what I'm doing. And generally, when I talk to people at my age, and other undergrads, their entire formation in not just college, but high school, middle school, elementary school, is that I'm going to college for myself, and their entire faith formation is Catholicism, or religion in general, isn't something that I am. It's something I do on the side. I get confirmed because it serves a certain societal function. It doesn't make me a different person. It doesn't leave a mark on my soul. They might not even believe in the soul. Or if they do, it's just something that they do on Sundays, as opposed to like a true part of them. And I think that like there's this general lack of not just seeing people, like an engineer seeing himself as an engineer, rather just doing something that makes, like being an engineer is just a label rather than being like actually like prescriptive. But how do we like, how do educators like break through and kind of get past like what could be called almost like bad formation or even not formation at all that happens at a lower educational level that they don't really have control over? And how do you kind of get past those like societal issues that completely like are antithetical to what people who want to promote ethics are interested in?
I don't have a ready answer for you. That's why I'm like waiting for Paul. Do you have words?
Yeah, I mean, this is the problem always. You look at the philosophical tradition, you look at the Catholic tradition, like virtue, you can elicit virtue, you can make the space for virtue, you can make the space for conversion, but you can't, force someone to convert, right? You can't do that. You can try. This is where aesthetic education, as Pope Francis said, is so important. Giving an object of love, giving exemplars for them to turn to is important. Those kinds of stories, literature, art, these kinds of things can make that space. But yeah, I mean, a lot of what we should do in universities is just make sure that we don't kind of create situations that degrade virtue, right, or kind of deform formation. But yeah, I mean, it is difficult if someone has no commitment to the good or can't see that broader picture. How to bring them there is a complex task that has a lot of kind of this relational aspect that you have to treat and engage each student one-on-one.
It's walking with.
Yeah.
It is very much. First of all, I congratulate you as a first-year student being brave enough to ask your question, and it is a very very smart and well-articulated question that is challenging, I think, all three of us. And so, well done. But I do think it is part of the challenge of our profession as professors to try to engage students and meet them where they're at, and at the same time pull them along to something deeper. I think when I moved from a theology department to a school of engineering, on some level, it opened up more possibility to simply treat Catholicism as a source of wisdom. That I think similar to what Bishop Paul was saying, when he came in with the collar on, it sent signal. When you come in with a theology professor title, there's an expectation of what you're going to be presenting, and some will reject it outright because of that signal. Coming in as an engineering professor, and I think to Bishop Paul's statement about each of us having this scientific background, also we have a certain authority amongst the people that we're talking with, that we're not just talking from nowhere, and that helps to bridge some of these divides and to not just confront the walls of this is what Catholicism is, but there's plenty of bad pedagogy out there. There's plenty of bad theological pedagogy out there, and it's tragic because it takes something that is full of wisdom and full of truth and makes it a stumbling block rather than the good that it can be.
I think a lot of it does have to do with where the origin of the message is coming from. Like saying the same thing is going to come different, or it's going to hit different depending on who it's coming from. And all three of us kind of have a different way of communicating. Clearly, I'm a 5'2", 5 feet tall. That's it. Yeah, I thought I was 5'2" for the longest time. I'm actually not. 5 feet even. The DMV says so. But really, in so doing, you need to meet students where they are, right? That's part of our mission. And in so doing, I do meet them where they are, and then I talk about TikTok. They're not checking email. I talk about the various apps that they might be using. And what's interesting there is a discussion of AirTags and the ways that they might use AirTags or their siblings use AirTags. So getting at how they are networked and how various people in their lives might give them up unknowingly. Then they realize it's something beyond them, that there's a lot that's not in their control. And then there's a discussion of, oh, Apple has actually thought a lot about the ethical implications of this. So I get them to go through all these research reports that they have gone through, all these different risks and had discussions. And a lot of who I teach are filmmakers. And then talking about automation and how they might be actually replaced by AI is something that makes the room go quiet a bit. Suddenly, oh, it's not just someone who thinks that they're holier than thou telling them how to be. It's really like, this involves you as well and your future prospects for which you're being trained now. So don't have your goals be right here and think that you're going to have the same goals that you did when you were 17. You're being trained in a holistic viewpoint that could be useful 5 years from now and beyond. And hammering that home is easier when you talk about just everyday things that they're using.
Thank you for your presentations, very helpful. I've been thinking about what all of you articulated in different ways about the stickiness of ethics. So, I mean, that seems to be the big problem here. And it doesn't seem like we can go backwards. So, like, removing the ethics class doesn't seem like it's going to help anything. But it's necessary but not sufficient, right? I really like this apprenticeship idea that I was hearing in various ways, I think from everybody, really. And the reason I like it, the more I think about it, is because, we have a lot working against us. I mean, sometimes ethics professors don't help themselves. Like, here's the categorical imperative. How's it going to solve your problems in this case? And it doesn't really connect with anybody. But also, I do think there's something powerful about that there's quantitative reasoning and there's qualitative reasoning, and we use different parts of our brain for those, and usually, like, pursuing excellence in quantitative reasoning, like, you just kind of tend to drown out the qualitative part, not on purpose, not because you're a bad person, but just because, like, that's not your goal right now. And I really learned this a few years ago. I was trying to design like a simple framework that students could use, and so we had like every single different business discipline represented, and everybody was going to use this. And it was very, very easy to do in management classes, in law classes. In marketing, it was always easy to find an example too. But in econ, finance, and accounting, it was a struggle. I mean, the good end of the story is that it works. Like, when you can land on something that combines qualitative and quantitative reasoning, it's really cool. But I think really, I mean, at the end of the day, the only way to develop both is this apprenticeship idea, is just to get people used to, there are multiple parts of your brain that you need to use on this one problem. It's not good enough just to make sure that the thing works and is accurate and efficient. So I guess that's not a question, but I do like this apprenticeship idea, and I'm already playing around with it in my mind. But yeah, it does seem to be
Well, it's funny,
Hopeful.
when I tell somebody I teach technology ethics, almost universally, I get the response, oh, we need more of that,
Yeah.
right? And so if you tell a technologist this or a technology professor this, and they say, we need more of that, then it's an open invitation to say, come join me, right? Join this effort, right? You're the one who's in the classroom with them, you know, more than I am. They're still only gonna take so many classes with me, right? They're gonna take, they're with you for all 4 years, you know, going through electrical engineering, you know, classes through, and then senior design, and like, if you are promoting ethics within your framework, now you're part of the solution here. And so there is this, it can't just be on the ethicist to do ethics. Right. It's one of the unique things about our discipline, right? Everybody should be teaching it, and everybody is participating in it, right? And one of the things I tell my students is, you all come to this class with 18 to 22 years of experience in doing ethics. It's not like the first time you learned a differential equation.
No,
and
it's,
someone
it's a
had to
branch
teach you
of
how to do it.
philosophy. It's already
Yeah.
there. You already got it.
So, yeah, there's something of the network here. And really creating a culture. And it comes back to the notion of culture, so.
Thank you for the presentations and the critiques from you. I like the idea of the way you are talking about is this formation, forming them to be engineers, not to do engineering. And then the bishop talked about not being specifically Catholic or Christian, and all of a sudden you begin to excuse yourself for mentioning Catholicism and all that. This is a Catholic university, no? And some students are here looking for that Catholic formation, no? Okay, for example, I teach, well, when I used to teach the basic healthcare ethics course. So a student said to me in class, why not give us what the Catholic doctrine says? Okay? Why not give us what the Catholic doctrine says? So, you'll get students like that. They want you to tell them, okay, if you are doing like the ethics of technology that we are doing, what does the Catholic Church say about the use of IVF? They don't want to reason about it. They just want you to tell them that and give them an exam on that. So, how do you navigate that? At the same time, you have people in class who are from other denominations. I'm not even talking about other religions. How do you navigate that?
Well, I teach healthcare ethics, and I give them the Catholic position alongside, you know, kind of what are the secular positions, you know, I mean, I teach it like that. A lot of what I'm trying to give them, though, with students, is this question of worldview, right? What is a Catholic anthropology? How do we relate to the world, right? Which I think is just the correct anthropology of what humans are, right, and what the world is. So that's what I'm trying to train students in. I mean, to get to this earlier point about, like, how do you kind of take people who aren't in the right place and also train people who really want to build their Catholic faith? A lot of it is, like, so for healthcare ethics, I construct my course as kind of a rhetorical argument against imagining that we're not social creatures, that we're just individual, isolated, autonomous beings, which is a lot of how healthcare ethics gets shaped in a certain way and how people come into the class thinking, and try to form them that more kind of communal, kind of communitarian Catholic idea of the person, right? So, and then you can explain like specific Catholic teachings within that anthropology as a whole, and it comes across a lot better once you've prepared a kind of this, you know, given them this worldview, this kind of proper paradigm.
Yeah, I mean, that resonates for me. The one thing I will say is that bioethics being about 40 years older, medical ethics being about 40 years older, is more developed, especially within the Catholic tradition, than tech ethics is. In many cases, there isn't an official, Catholic teaching on the future of AI, or even social media is still sort of being formed and stuff like. So a lot of that sort of official teaching that we're looking for hasn't really been sorted out and developed, but you can get to it through the lens of other commitments that and anthropology and belief systems and understanding of what constitutes the good life and what constitutes community and what constitutes our responsibility to one another, and our responsibility to ourselves and to God and to the integral ecology and right. You can get to it through those lenses and then take that next step and say, well, what does this mean for our relationship with TikTok? What does that mean for our relationship with VR, visual, virtual reality, right? Like, what is it going to mean for these technologies that are coming in the future that we haven't even necessarily written down a doctrine of yet? But we can explore this together if we can name the commitments that we have. And so I approach it in a similar way of like, let's start with these foundational commitments. What do you actually believe? And what are you committed to? So
I have the fun research outlook of being inductive in my approach. So I see what's out there first and then try to analyze it as an ethnographer. But speaking of TikTok, if we didn't have this ability to entertain multiple faiths, as they intersect with technology, we wouldn't have the ability to discuss things like Mormon Mom TikTok, which students find hilarious, by the way. They also find it interesting to talk about techno-spirituality, as explained by Genevieve Bell from Intel. She talks about how back in the flip phone days, people would need to get these, find Mecca applications, and then they would use their phones to find Mecca. So people who thought themselves not too involved with technology, they were actually using technology as it comported with their spiritual practices. Similar to that, she has this lovely article about No More SMS from Jesus, of this community in Norway that was so distraught when suddenly they were no longer able to receive SMSs from Jesus, as it were. And that was a whole cultural study of the meaning ascribed to this mediated service, literally. And were they indeed receiving these messages directly from Jesus as they were led to believe? And I was just helping with a story with the Catholic News Service, talking about apps and surveillance through prayer apps, and whether or not the developer of that app was aware of these implications. And even though the developer was not aware of the ethical implications specifically, that was still an issue that was worth talking about. So these intersections, people might not realize are there, and if you're not interested in technology, it's still interested in you, is something that I like to say, because we're all networked.
So we have about 7 minutes left of this. So before, I have one more question for everybody. But I want to pay attention, on the back of the program, there's a QR code and just a little tiny URL link at the bottom that I would love your thoughts. It's not so much a review what we did today, but it's more like looking at the next steps. What are some things the Grefenstette Center can be working on? What are, from the sort of Catholic framework, what are things we can highlight? What are some struggles to really to think through? And what types of things can we offer as a center that'll help do these sort of things? So it's just sort of 3 questions. You could do it now, you could do it later, but just wanted to point out that piece. And of course, to think about tomorrow morning, breakfast starts at 8, and then we have a whole big day full of exciting things tomorrow. Okay, so that's my preamble. My question is, we've talked a lot about Catholic ethics and higher education, tech ethics more generally, and as it goes into the secular mode. We haven't really talked about Catholic ethics as a liberative and sort of iconoclastic voice in the world today, right? What is as we look at technology and we think about the, Pope Francis' church, of the poor, for the poor, and what does that mean when we talk about technology? What does it mean as one thing that I find unique within the voice of Christianity and within Catholicism specifically at times, is this sort of liberative, countercultural voice that says we're not going to focus on money, we're going to focus on poverty, we're going to lift up the last, and the last shall be first, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So can you just talk a little bit about how you wrestle with that within your own courses? Because obviously training engineers, training university students, it's training middle and upper middle class America for the most part and around the world. So how do you deal with these difficult issues that sort of lie at the heart of the Catholic and Christian faith?
It's the mark of a good question when nobody is.
Yeah, I mean, it's whenever it's part of being like communal, thinking about the common good, like that kind of turn towards, and then preferential option for the poor. Like I have a lot of Catholic social teaching in my bioethics and my technology ethics, right? So, looking at how different kinds of structures and specifically harm the poor, right? And showing the injustice of that.
So it's interesting teaching in Silicon Valley because often my issue, even though it is a Catholic university, is the Jesuit university in Silicon Valley, right? Often the issue is not so much how do you bring I guess these liberal commitments to the poor, the preferential option for the poor, is not the aspect of Catholic teaching that needs to be emphasized in Silicon Valley. But it is the personal responsibility for that in connecting how we design technology to connect to that idea, right? So I don't have to convince them that they have to look out for the poor, but I do have to convince them that when they build an app, it's not going to be looking out for the poor. It's going to be taking advantage, right? Of the vulnerable, right? And therefore, how do we think about that, and how do we redesign for that, and how do we think about the values that are laden within our technology? Here, I think, and here again, we get back to the first set of presentations and this notion of the technocratic paradigm as a way of thinking. Like that word paradigm, it is a complex way of thinking is what Francis is getting at, and he's trying to get us off of that way of thinking. And this is one of those elements that Francis, in many ways, is leading us beyond what Catholic teaching has done before, in that he's recognizing that technology is a part of this countercultural problem, but he's framing it in a different way with the technocratic paradigm, where he says, we have this complex way of thinking that is always looking to profit, that is always looking to count everything, that is always looking to the quantitative instead of the qualitative, that is always looking to, but is also always looking at progress for progress's sake instead of progress to the end of some other telos, and then really trying to decide what that telos should be, and having good discernment as a society as well as a church, and then what can the church say to that? He's leading us there, but I think it has not been developed enough by the theologians to take that and to the next level and say, you know, what does this mean for our technological future, which is happening faster than we can keep up with, right? So I don't know if that answers your question, John, but I do think there's commitments on many different levels here, right? And asking what Catholicism can bring to that broader social conversation. I'm not sure, at least from my context, bringing the commitment to the poor is not necessarily the element that needs to be brought. It's the connection to your technology that is lost in that process.
Thank you. This is relating to a conversation I had with Paul offline, which is the focus has been so much and still is on what we can do, what the capabilities of technology and AI are. And we have this great opportunity to talk about what we should do. And so to really cleave into that would be, you know, applying to all sorts of assumptions that we make about the poor, like that they don't use technology, or that they don't have cell phones, and they don't have smartphones. And that's a very kind of developing studies kind of way to look at things, but what ways can technology and the services that people develop be predatory? And what ways can they be exploitative? Marginalized people being compelled to use these platforms and services are unable to provide consent, for example. So I've been looking at mobility data ethics, online games, and if you are tracking children in their own homes, are they necessarily providing consent? Well, if you have AI-driven games or game design, then you know, every motion and engagement from a child, for example, is lumped into the decision-making algorithms, right? Which then improve the game or funnel them towards more engagement. Right? This is what we've learned from just casual games on mobile phones and whatnot. So, you know, it's these things that I think that society would look to the what we should do. And I think we represent a good cross-section of that community, and maybe we can help inform policy as part of that, because the lawyers are also trying to figure that out and get ahead of things as well. So.